Hi everyone, this is Andrew Houghtonville from the University of New Hampshire. We'll be waiting just a little bit to give people time and to give Zoom time to settle in. We've had experiences in the past where lots of people are coming in, Zoom experiences a bit of a delay. And so we'll probably give it about 2 minutes before starting the actual session. We're currently at 410 participants. And when we break 500, we'll be breaking a record at the University of New Hampshire, at least. We have over 1,000 people registered to participate today. So we're really looking forward to it. Again, we'll wait about 2 minutes before starting, just to give people a time to check in. $500. We just broke 500. It's really great to see the interest in this really important topic. I'll wait probably another 30 seconds or so before we start the official webinar. Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome everybody to the ADA Generation, New Perspectives on Employment of College Graduates with Disabilities. And this is a webcast put on by Kessler Foundation with support from the University of New Hampshire, which is me and my colleague Kim Phillips primarily. Let's get started. So just some logistical things to take care of before moving on. And so this may be a lag in the slides. Let me just move on with the slides. Sometimes at the beginning of webcasts, we've had a lag from when I hit move forward in the presentation to when the page turns. So let me just, I have a printout. Let me just talk about the upfront logistics. So this webcast will be recorded. The recording will be placed alongside the main report and the main findings and the executive summary on Kessler Foundation's website, kesslerfoundation.org /KF survey 2020. Right? That will be on the screen if we get the thing to move. Now I've hit the space bar like 5 times, so it may like jump 5 slides. Ferris, can you see if you can make it move? Hey, there we go. Now it might just jump like 5 more because we'll make do. After the presentations, we'll be doing question and answers. And question and answers can be answered by a box that appears on the Zoom ribbon. So there's a Q&A section. The chat area has been, I think, disabled for this webcast, and you can ask questions. Importantly, we're gonna hold open the webcast after 12 o'clock, after 1 o'clock Eastern, to give time to answer Q&A questions in the Q&A function, because a lot of times people ask questions at the end. So we're going to hold it open and try to answer as much as we can in the questions and answer box. People will be answering questions along the way, either verbally or via text, via the chat, via the Q&A function. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to our first keynote speaker, Roger DeRoche, from the President and CEO of Kessler Foundation. So take it away, Roger.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you all here for the release of our survey findings to commemorate the 30-year anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this program was originally planned to take place in the Visitors Center in Washington, D.C., but because of the restrictions related to the health crisis, we decided to deliver results through this webinar. And as Andrew said, it's titled The ADA Generation, New Perspectives on Employment and College Graduates with Disabilities. We're very pleased that we have more than 1,300 that registered for today's session, I think, which shows very strong interest in the topic of education and employment for individuals with disabilities. Just so everyone knows, this is the third major disability study that Kessler Foundation has funded since 2015, and we've conducted these with the University of New Hampshire Institute on Disability. And this particular study is based on a sample of over 4,700 recent college graduates. 50% reported one disability, at least one. The other 50% no disability. And the key goals of this study were, first, to look at the college experience of recent graduates. Second, to review the employment experience of those graduates. And third, to determine the relationship between the college experience and their real world experience. And I would say, finally, we really wanted to develop new ideas for supporting success in the workplace while improving the educational experiences for college students with disabilities. So I know that that you're going to find the survey data helpful, both in your own work, and hopefully it'll also inform many of the state agencies you work with, federal agencies, private foundations, other resources that are needed to improve employment success in the future. I think most of all, this study shows that college graduates with disabilities were very involved in preparing for their career while they were in college. And that, in fact, influenced their work experience following their college career. And it's clear, however, that there are still challenges that exist. And I think this study identifies opportunities to continually make improvements. So here to provide comments is a very good friend to the disability community, a person that many of you know, and that is Jennifer Sheehy, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the U.S. Department of Labor. And following Jennifer's comments, you'll hear from our presenting panelists, which include my colleagues from Kessler Foundation, Elaine Katz, our Senior Vice President of our grant-making operation, as well as communications, Dr. John O'Neill, our Director of Employment and Disability Research, and from the University of New Hampshire, Dr. Andrew Houghtonville and Dr. Kimberly Phillips. So let me turn it over to Jennifer Sheehy. Jennifer, it's great to have you here.
Roger, thank you so much. This is an exciting survey. I have to tell you, we at the Department of Labor and the Office of Disability Employment Policy, we love data. Data drives everything that we do because we need to have a firm foundation for our work and to make sure that it's relevant. Certainly, we also seek input from our stakeholders, and college students with disabilities and young people with disabilities are important stakeholders. So understanding what they're experiencing is really important. This is an interesting and challenging time right now. First of all, I want to say that we're excited to celebrate 30 years of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And at the Department of Labor, we have a calendar of events celebrating the foundation of the civil rights of people with disabilities. But in this pandemic, I think it's even more important to make sure that we include the talents and skills of all people, including those of young people who are launching their careers right now. It will be more difficult for them because of everything that's going on. And it's important that all of us as partners are there to support them. Our theme for the ADA anniversary is increasing access and opportunity. And one important feature of the ADA, when it was being passed, when it was back in the late 80s, one really important feature is that other groups besides those of people with disabilities supported passage of the ADA. So allies really helped pass the ADA, and that meant groups of all diverse communities. And in a time when people right now may feel disenfranchised, it's important that people with disabilities are allies of other groups, because that's what our civil rights is built on. That's what our economy is built on, is the benefit of diverse people in businesses contributing all of their skills and talents. At the Department of Labor and the Office of Disability Employment Policy, we do have several programs that support college students with disabilities and those launching their careers. Just want to mention a couple of them. Our apprenticeship inclusion models take best practices in high demand industries and make sure that young people with disabilities can access those apprenticeship opportunities. Then we have a community college project that makes sure that universal design for learning is the basic foundation for successful completion of community college certificates and credentials, and then working in a business or employer of someone's choice. And those are inclusive of people with all disabilities. And then we also have our workforce recruitment program. And that is a program, it's a database where we help match young people, college students, and recent graduates with disabilities with federal employment, with those opportunities. It's all important right now, but I think we will learn a lot from this survey that will enhance our services and what we can offer in support of young people with disabilities that have those dreams of careers like all of us, and we want to help them get them started on the right path. So I will turn it back over to Andrew now for the results of the survey. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. It's great to hear you guys. Thank you both, Jennifer and Roger, for your comments. Let me jump into the discussion, the background. So just to give you an idea of the background, the ADA anniversary, it's the 30th year, so you can think of people who were born 30 years ago. They never knew a world without the ADA, right? And so if you think of recent college graduates as being people, say, 25 to 30, who graduated recently, either with a bachelor's degree or associate's degree or what, more advanced degrees, you can think about they did that underneath and in the context of the ADA's existence. All right. So just to give you a bit of background, since the ADA, the number of college graduates with disabilities has tripled. So citing some other research, it's gone from 6% to about 20% around 4 years ago. And so these are kind of the latest statistics from Department of, college-related surveys. All right. So that's a pretty astounding jump for sure. And let's go to the next slide. And so one of the things that to kind of give you a background to what some of the things that Roger and Jennifer mentioned from a statistical perspective is the employment gap between people with and without disabilities. And so these are labor force participation rates. So the percentage of people with disabilities or without disabilities that are actively looking for work or working, right? So they're participating in the labor market. And so that gap is, has been persistently low, almost double. The labor force participation rate of people without disabilities is almost double traditionally than people with disabilities. And that's true, you know, however you slice it. It's a little, the gap is a little narrower when you do people who we're looking at, people around ages 20 to 34, that gap tightens a bit. And so, you know, these are the kinds of statistics that we're facing. And, you know, some of the research questions that come out of this is, since, you know, the 30 years since the ADA, to what extent is college paying off for people with disabilities? Are students with disabilities engaging? Roger already tipped the hand a little bit with some of the preview, but are they participating in college preparation in ways that are similar to their peers without disabilities? Are they successful in transitioning to work after they graduate? And, you know, do the employment outcomes, job quality, job characteristics of research college grads, do those things close? Do those differences close when you are a college graduate, for recent college graduates? One of the probably big takeaways, so I'm an economist by training, probably one of the biggest takeaways before we get started is college does pay off, right? You hear a lot of people doubting whether college is a payoff, but there's about a 10% wage premium for every year of education that you get. And that's a long-standing finding in labor economics. And some of the work we've been doing at UNH with funding from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, NIDLR, has shown that people with disabilities absolutely benefit from college degrees. Physical disability more so, people with physical disabilities more so than people with mental and cognitive related disabilities. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim Phillips. I'm happy to take any kind of questions people have at the end. But I'm going to quickly turn it over to Kim Phillips, who's going to talk about the results of the survey.
Thank you, Andrew. Move to the next slide, please. Before I dive into the findings from the survey, I would like to acknowledge Kimara Nzamubona, Todd Honeycutt, Derek Nord, and Michael Brooks for their contributions to this research. Thank you. Next. So as Roger mentioned, the survey sample included 4,738 respondents from all 50 states who were part of a Qualtrics general population panel. They were ages 20 to 35 years old and had graduated in the previous 5 years with their first undergraduate degree. Just under half were men, just under half were women, and 2% were non-binary, transgender, or other gender. 61% were white, non-Hispanic. And as Roger mentioned, the researchers imposed some quotas such that we would get roughly equal samples of people with and without disabilities. So 49.8% of this sample had a self-reported disability. Next slide. Disability was measured using 10 items. Many of these were well-known questions borrowed from national surveys, such as the American Community Survey and the Canadian Survey on Disability. And we created some additional prompts to increase representation of certain disability types. So the most common disability type among the respondents was psychiatric, mental, or behavioral health conditions at 23%. This was followed by cognitive difficulties at 18%. Then learning disabilities, vision, upper or lower mobility disabilities were all around 11 to 12%. Finally, hearing, intellectual and developmental disabilities, and an open-ended other disability category had the fewest respondents. Of course, these categories were not mutually exclusive, and respondents could report more than one type of disability. Next. Degree and institution type. A quick note about the charts in this presentation. Disability statistics are marked with a D, and statistically significant differences in charts are indicated with color and pattern differences. So blue polka dotted bars with a D represent the disability statistic, while orange striped bars indicate the no disability group. And if you notice bars that are solid and gray, that indicates no statistically significant difference in the comparison. So what this chart shows is that recent college graduates with disabilities were significantly more likely to have an associate's degree as their highest degree than recent graduates without disabilities. That was 19% versus 16%. The majority of the sample, however, about 2/3 of respondents reported a bachelor's degree as their highest degree, and about 20% had an advanced degree. Now, despite that respondents reported their highest degree, as shown here, remaining survey questions focused on undergraduate experiences, and it was these undergraduate experiences that had to have happened within the previous 5 years. Next slide. Most of the sample attended a state college or university, although this was a little bit less likely among people with disabilities who were significantly more likely to have earned their primary degree from community college, that is 18% versus 15%. About 1/4 of the recent graduates with and without disabilities had graduated from a private college or university. Next. One more note that in the tables, statistically significant differences between recent graduates with and without disabilities are shown with blue highlight and an asterisk. Gray or white rows indicate no statistically significant disability-related difference. So as to the reasons that recent graduates chose to get their degree from community college, the number one reason was financial, meaning it was a lower cost than other schools. The second most common reason, which was more likely among recent graduates with disabilities, was the location, that the school was easier to get to than other schools. And the other top 5 reasons, which were common to both groups, include better chance of acceptance than at a 4-year university, a better match for interests or career goals, and that the schedule better fit with their other commitments. Next slide. Business management was the most common major among both the disability and no disability groups, although it was significantly more likely among recent graduates without disabilities at 23% versus 18%. Health and related sciences was the second most common major and was equally likely among the disability and no disability groups. Not including health and related sciences, other science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM majors, were significantly less common among recent graduates with disabilities at 30 versus 35%. Conversely, some majors that were significantly more common among recent graduates with disabilities were education, psychology, communication, social sciences and history, visual and performing arts, and general liberal arts. Next slide. College preparation activities during college. Next. About half of the recent college graduates had an assigned faculty advisor or mentor. Recent college graduates with disabilities were more likely to have used an advising center and slightly but significantly more likely to report having had an informal faculty advisor or mentor. Both groups were equally likely to have an assigned or informal peer advisor or mentor. However, one thing not shown is that among recent graduates who did not have an assigned peer advisor or mentor, recent graduates with disabilities were more likely to identify an informal peer advisor or mentor. Next slide. Recent college graduates with disabilities engaged in career services about as much as their peers without disabilities. So there were no disability-related differences, that's the gray bars if you're looking at the chart, in the use of a job fair or job recruiters on campus, resume or cover letter training, interview training or mock interviews, or career explorations. Recent college graduates with disabilities were slightly but significantly more likely to report having met with career counselors. Despite this mostly equivalent utilization, recent college graduates with disabilities were less likely to report that some of these career services had been helpful to their actual career, including the use of job recruiters, mock interviews, and even meeting with career counselors. Next slide. About 2/3 of recent college graduates participated in career-related internships, and recent college graduates with disabilities were slightly but significantly more likely than those without disabilities to have done so. The majority of both groups said that their internships were related to their intended fields, and both groups were equally likely on reflection to say that the internships were somewhat or very helpful to their careers so far, and the majority did say so. Next slide. Recent college graduates with and without disabilities were equally likely to have worked for wages at a typical job during college, and about 2/3 did so. Of these, 62% in both the disability and no disability groups indicated that their undergraduate jobs were related to or helped to prepare them for their employment in their intended field after college. Next slide. Fewer people were self-employed during college, although it was significantly more common among those with disabilities at 11% versus 9%. And about 3/4 of those who had been self-employed were indicated that their self-employment was related to or helped to prepare them for their intended field. There was no disability-related difference. Next, please. Post-college employment is next. So recent college graduates are most definitely striving to work. More than 3/4, 79% of recent graduates with disabilities and without indicated that they were currently employed at the time of the survey. Another 10% had worked since they graduated, although were not currently working. And of the minority who had not worked since graduation, recent graduates with disabilities were slightly but significantly more likely to have ever worked in the past. Another 2 to 3% had never worked but were looking for a job, and there was no disability-related difference in this group. So that leaves very few who were not striving to work in some way. Only 3% of recent graduates with disabilities and 4% of recent graduates without disabilities had never worked and were not looking for a job. Next slide. As to working arrangement among the currently employed, about 2/3 of recent graduates with disabilities reported working in regular permanent positions, which is significantly less than the 3/4 of recent graduates without disabilities who reported the same. Conversely, those with disabilities were more likely than their non-disabled peers to work as a consultant or freelancer, to work intermittently or on call, or to be paid by a temporary agency. Next. Maybe there's a lag in the slide, but I'll just continue. The top 5 job categories accounted for about half of respondents who were currently employed, and 4 out of 5 were common to recent college graduates with and without disabilities. These were health occupations, engineering and architecture, thank you, teaching and education, and sales and marketing jobs. Recent college graduates with disabilities also had clerical and administrative positions in the number 4 position, and those without disabilities had computer-related occupations as their number 3. Next slide. Among bachelor's degree holders, recent college graduates with disabilities were more likely to be employed in person-related or helping professions such as teaching or education or counseling, whereas recent graduates without disabilities were more likely working in STEM professions. This is, as we may have predicted, if you recall the differences in the college majors.
Eris, I'm back on. I lost my contact for a second, so I'll be moving the slides. I'll go to the next slide, Kim.
Yes, I'm now on slide number 31. Chi-square analyses showed statistically significant differences in the distribution of hourly wage ranges, with recent graduates with disabilities more likely earning less than $15 an hour and less likely earning in the higher ranges. However, because the majority of recent graduates all earned in the middle of the range, there were no disability-related significant differences in the average or the median wage. So the median wage for recent college graduates with disabilities was $18 an hour, and for those without disabilities, it was $20 an hour, a non-significant, statistically speaking, difference. Okay, next slide. About 10% of respondents who were not currently employed were looking for work. And when asked about job search barriers that they had faced, more than 40% of recent graduates with and without disabilities said not enough training. Recent graduates with disabilities were more likely to also cite employer assumptions that they couldn't do the job, less pay than others in a similar job, and negative employer attitudes as job search barriers. Next. Earlier, we discussed career preparation activities during college, and I shared some of the recent college graduates' perceptions of the career helpfulness of some of their experiences. So next, we're going to look a little more objectively at how these experiences were associated with post-college employment status. Next. Okay, so this slide shows a comparison within rather than between groups. So among recent graduates with disabilities, there was a slight but significant employment disadvantage among health and health science majors compared to all other majors. Conversely, there was a slight advantage for education majors among people with disabilities. They were slightly more likely to be employed than people with disabilities from other majors. And then the third comparison is among computer science majors. Computer science majors were more likely to be currently employed than all other majors, but only for the no disability group. There was no such advantage for recent graduates with disabilities. Next slide. What this slide shows is that among recent graduates with disabilities, the use of any services, including student accessibility services, academic advising, and career services, it's associated with a greater likelihood of being currently employed after graduation. Next slide. Internships were also significantly associated with a greater likelihood of employment after college, regardless of disability status. Of those who were currently working, more than 2/3 had completed internships versus just over half who were not working. Next slide. Similarly, working for wages during college was significantly associated with greater likelihood of employment after graduating. Of those who were currently working, nearly 3/4 had worked for wages versus about half of those who were not working. Next. So before I turn it over to John and Elaine to discuss the key takeaways and the implications of these survey findings, I want to mention that many more analyses are planned for the data generated by the the Kessler Foundation National Employment and Disability Survey of recent graduates. Next slide. Certainly, we have more quantitative analyses planned, but I'd like to focus on the qualitative analyses that are upcoming. We asked recent graduates to share advice for current and future college students to help them better prepare for work after graduation. And next slide. Recent graduates gave some general advice, such as learn how to interview. Experience is everything. If you can, job shadow someone in your field. They also gave specific advice to students with the same disabilities that they themselves reported. Next slide. For example, some recent graduates with mental or behavioral health disabilities said, take everything a day at a time. Be open and do not be afraid to ask for help. Know you're not alone, and your difficulties do not make you unemployable. Thank you.
We're going to now hear from John and Elaine with key takeaways. John, Elaine.
Okay, next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about how college pays off. We know that the rate of employment increases at higher levels of education for everyone. And what's most important is that for people with disabilities, there's a greater proportional bump at each level. For example, as persons with disabilities move from AA degrees to BA degrees, we see that there is a 20% improvement in their employment rates versus only a 1% improvement for people without disabilities. Also, employment discrepancies between people with and without disabilities decrease as educational levels increase. Most of these results I'm taking from the larger national American community surveys. Next slide. Community college is certainly an important pathway to employment. We know that earnings are greater at higher levels of education, and that's for both people with and without disabilities. However, when people with disabilities move from a high school degree to an AA degree, the proportional bump in earnings for people with disabilities outstrips improvement for people without disabilities. Also, as mentioned above, people with disabilities get a greater percent improvement in employment than people without disabilities at each educational level. And I emphasize the and the greatest proportional bump up is between high school and community college, where people with disabilities see a 34% improvement in employment rates, whereas people without disabilities only see a 10% improvement. Elaine, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. So next slide, please. What's really exciting about our survey findings is that it counters the many longstanding myths about the potential for young people with disabilities in college. When it comes to engagement and career preparation, we saw a little difference between the career preparation activities of graduates with disabilities and their non-disabled peers. taking advantage of career services office on campus, whether seeking out career guidance, using career office connections to help find part-time job or volunteer experiences while in school, can make a really big difference in successful employment after graduation. What may be the more surprising finding coming from this study is that recent college graduates with disabilities engaged in the same type of career preparation activities as much as their non-disabled peers. Next slide, please. You know, it's common that at universities and colleges, the Office of Disability Employment and Career Services are located on different parts of the campuses. Career service offices may not be accessible. The staff may not be aware of the specific needs of students with disabilities, like accommodations for job interviews. But a growing practice seems to be that co-locating the disability and service offices in the same building using a universal design approach works to meet all the needs of the students. It's also not surprising that we saw higher rates of dissatisfaction with career services from recent college graduates with disabilities. Sometimes we forget that satisfaction is also an accessible and a universal design issue when services are not comparable. A good example of the integration of careers and disability services was in a pilot funded by Kessler Foundation, launched in 2013 by San Diego State University Interwork Institute. Bridging the Gap College to Careers program looked at a public-private, non-traditional approach to career development, and it was designed to improve the employment outcomes of students with disabilities. This was really the first credited college career curriculum that was supplemented by peer mentorships, business mentorships, internships, and job search assistance to design and prepare students with disabilities to compete and succeed in the marketplace. And it really did result in higher placement and starting salaries and other programs that we've seen. Back to you, John.
Okay.
Next slide.
Next slide, please. Thank you. Striving to work. The findings from this current college graduate survey are very consistent with the 2015 Kessler Foundation National Disability Employment Survey that actually celebrated the 25th anniversary of the ADA. That survey also found that high proportions of people with disabilities were striving to work by overcoming certain barriers, such as employers assuming they couldn't do the job because of their disability, lack of transportation, and negative attitudes on the part of fellow employees and supervisors. The 2015 KFNEDS and the current survey found that people with disabilities were also concerned about getting less pay than others. And the earnings outcomes from the recent college graduates survey, this survey, tend to support that fear somewhat, in the fact that individuals with disabilities were less likely to be in the categories where higher earnings were being obtained. I will turn it back to you, Elaine.
Okay, next slide, please. So our study found that recent college graduates with disabilities are less likely to major in STEM, which is the acronym for science, technology, engineering, and math. And it focused on careers outside of health and related services for our survey. As jobs in the high-tech field continue to grow, it's really more important than ever that college students with disabilities major in STEM to prepare for growing employment in fields such as accounting, in finance, software development, business analytics, and research. There are some nonprofit organizations like Lime Connect and Integrate that are among the many that do help place college graduates with disabilities in STEM careers. As we see employers continue to diversify their workforces and become more inclusive, we have companies such as Northrop Grumman, SAP, Microsoft that are all hiring recent college graduates with disabilities for their high-tech career pathways. That's why going to college is solid advice for transition age students with disabilities, or even going back to school for others with disabilities who now feel ready or are interested. As the economy in the US continues to recover, going back to school is solid advice for everyone. It's going to be important to get the next set of skills and training for the new jobs and careers that may actually be created in the aftermath of the pandemic. Next slide. Back to you, Andrew.
All right. Well, thank you, John and Elaine. Those are some great comments. What we're going to do now is I'll probably be the one asking the questions. I've been reading a little bit of the questions that are been asked in the Q&A box. A few of them seem to have some common themes. So let me take the easiest ones first. The slides will be available online at kesslerfoundation.org. If you Google Kessler Foundation and survey recent college grads, you'll probably be able to get there very quickly. The slides and the final report with all the results and the executive summary are available on that website.